Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we have a longtime listener and patron, Gluax, coming back with a pretty in-depth prompt, all things considered. And the prompt sounds a little bit like this. Welcome to the land of 1,000 tombs, where the land is a harsh desert, where it is close to impossible to survive. However, tombs of immense scale exist throughout the world, and inside of those tombs are entire ecosystems. This is inspired by the Sondung Cave, and then there's a link for that in that. Thank you, by the way, appreciate it. And Egyptian pyramids and culture. This world was originally lush and beautiful, and the tombs were constructed to put dead rulers with living people whose families would take care of the rulers for generations. Some catastrophic event turned the world into the way it is now. The tenets, we've got them. Number one, the people living in these tomb ecosystems believe the world to be ravaged by the gods, and they originally housed rulers who were divine representations of gods. Think Egyptian rulers or pharaohs were thought to be representations of their gods. Number two, slavery is quintessential in this world. Whether it is to construct a new biome tomb or to toss the slaves to the wayside when population becomes too high. However, slaves are the only people who are descendants of these rulers. Number three, the slaves are all descendants of the original rulers of divine blood, thus granting them resistance to a degree to the outside world and allowing them to be sacrificed to create new biome tombs. Well, a very in-depth, very complex, and I mean that as a punny way, prompt that we've got here from Gluax. Thank you again, Gluax, for your prompt. And remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at Let's Worldbuild on Twitter. And if you want to come join our Discord and talk about whatever you want to, as long as it's like kind of related to what we're doing here, you can click on the link in the description of this episode to follow that and come join our community. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous or you just want access to those sweet, sweet patron-only episodes, you can click the link in our description to our Patreon and give us money there. Without further ado, we can finally get into the prompt. It's very involved. I'm very excited to see what we've got going on here. And Courtney, why don't you get us started off today?
All right. So my first one addresses the slave class. They're descended from divine royalty and they're treated well, almost like a gilded cage type scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But their purpose is ultimately to be sacrificed in a ritual where their body becomes the tomb biome.
Ooh,
like if you think to the opening scene of the movie Prometheus, where an alien performs a ritual that like basically rips it apart, dissolves their body down to the genetic level, and it serves as kind of a progenitor figure for life on the planet. Also picturing a scene from the movie Annihilation where a character's skin and veins start turning into plant matter. But I also don't see this as a true death for the sacrificial slave, more so as like a really severe transformation where their essence or their soul still lives on in this biome and maybe can still even be interacted with on some level, or get some sort of life force from the people living in it and tending to it. And then I guess branching off of that, that also kind of has implications for biomes having personalities of sorts. And, you know, what happens if a biome is abandoned? Are you like dooming that soul to solitary confinement almost?
Right. Also, nice pun on branching, by the way. I appreciate that. We're very punny today. Also, for those of you playing at home, we do have Annihilation mentioned on the bingo card from Courtney. And I'm sure because we're dealing with like a pyramid that we're going to be mentioning the 1999 Brendan Fraser classic, The Mummy. So you might as well. I think that's a free space.
That should just be our free space. Is The Mummy.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay. I really do find that to be fascinating, Courtney, because the tenet is it kind of implies this kind of like super science or magic that they have
Mhm.
that is, I mean, it is creepy, and it's also repulsive, and it's also like, yeah, there is some like semblance of I like when you said gilded cage, because that is
Mhm.
something that I was hoping we would be able to kind of like approach this particular topic with.
I mean, I love the callback to the kind of Prometheus sacrifice aliens,
Yes.
and it's just like terrifying. And then also the idea of them being part of the tomb, so that
Yeah,
we can make
yeah.
them sentient. So like that's kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
makes them essential right off the bat.
Yes. Uh, Question about how they interact with one another, though, because how expansive are these biomes? Like, do they communicate with one another?
Mm.
Maybe. I hadn't had that in my tenet, but I could certainly see that being the case. Or like what happens if multiple sacrifices are carried out nearby? Do they start to like blend together?
Right, because I mean, I'm imagining that these are like, I mean, if I'm assuming this is all underground or mostly underground for the
Mhm.
most part, right?
Mhm.
So
The tombs.
yeah, they're tombs, right? So
Oh,
like they're
I pictured pyramids like in the desert or some kind of objects that are like in the desert above the ground.
I guess it could be
Weirdly.
both. Like maybe there are
Oh yeah,
artificial
true.
ones that they built up as
Mhm.
pyramids or some sort of structure, but there are also ones in caves and like underground
Hmm.
areas.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking a mixture of both here. So you,
Yeah, that'd be
Mhm.
cool.
but
Different
but
shapes.
life is basically on the inside based on the tenets that are surrounding it, like with the divine wrath,
Mhm.
but I think that is definitely something that we should probably consider, is that again, I'm thinking like an underground motif for the most part, and there's got to be some connectivity, whether it be like a vine or a leaf or a root system or something like that, like
Ooh,
if
yeah.
you're saying that their essentially essence becomes a tree or a biome or something like that.
Mhm.
I can't help but think that there's some kind of a communication network happening between them.
Yeah, or there could be shit, what is it called when you take like a cutting from a plant? Is it just a cutting? Daniel, you're the gardener.
That's true.
Clipping?
Yeah.
I don't know what they're called.
Okay.
Are
When
you are
yeah,
you
when
talking
you
about transplanting?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
like when
like
you slice.
if you
Yeah.
like cut a piece of one biome off and like transport it to another one, does that allow for some sort of communication or messaging system?
And now, of course, we have to think about this idea that there's going to be an ultra tomb that has multiple, like transplants from different biomes, like in one place.
Mhm. I guess I don't know enough about the setting yet to say like how they communicate with each other if they do. But I
Mm.
mean, I like these ideas.
Yeah, this is already off to a rollicking good start. Daniel, why don't you continue this rollicking good start into a rollicking good middle and get us going on your tenant?
I'm interested in the relationship of these slaves to whomever is doing the enslaving, because the prompt doesn't really talk about who is enslaving them,
Mm-hmm.
only that there were rulers who were entombed, and there's a class of people derived from them that are maintaining them, and we know that the environment is an apocalypse. So I thought maybe and these words I'm going to use can be interpreted however, but I imagine the slavers as being really powerful, quote unquote, sorcerers
Mm.
who use some kind of resource or latent power in the tomb to enact the enslaving, which I think can work with what Courtney's saying, because if
Mm-hmm.
slaves are the tomb, then I'm thinking they tap into the tomb somehow to establish their power. And when I say
Mm.
sorcerer, I don't. It could be anything. It doesn't have to actually be magical, but I just mean someone who has some kind of either supernatural or super science power over tomb that is
Mhm.
the ruling class in some way.
That's really fascinating. And let me help
Mhm.
you out,
Agreed.
Daniel,
Yeah.
because one of my tenets deals directly with the people in charge here. Because I like you, I kind of had this concept or this kind of question mark. And I looked at the tenet, I looked at what Gluax was offering, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna make this a cheat tenet. And I'm going to say two things. One, I think that this setting in particular is rife for a horror aesthetic. So the genre for me is going to be a deep, deep horror setting. And with that in mind, the reason I bring it up for you, Daniel, is because my tenet suggests that those who are enslaving these people are in fact the dead pharaohs themselves. The ritual in the tomb, they basically become unliving pharaohs. And I love the idea that, you know, these people look at their pharaohs and their rulers as though they were gods and they had power of the gods. We combine those ideas. Yeah, guess what? The sorcerer kings of these tombs, Daniel, that's what you're talking about. They're just the rulers of the tombs man, I'm getting excited here. Anyway, they're basically mummies or sorcerer mummies or something like that. But that's my tenet. That's my idea. Let's talk about Daniel's a little bit more, because I think that this through line that we've created here works remarkably well.
Can we add a wrinkle to that? So, like, I like that. The only issue I'm seeing is it seems to be set up that the slaves and the families that they maintain, like, they didn't have, at least from my sense from the premise, they didn't have an antagonistic relationship. Like, the dead entombed people don't seem to be the slavers. So I'm wondering, and that's exactly what you're saying. So I'm wondering that they are. So I'm wondering then, is there a way to make that less clear cut? Because then the tombed people are the evil ones, and yet their families are the ones enslaved by them to maintain their own tombs. You see what I mean? Like, it seems a little bit like there's not really a separate antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So the sense I was getting from the premise is that there's these enslaved families that are derived from the pharaohs, right? Or from the entombed people.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to have a positive relationship to them. I mean, it was my guess. But you're suggesting that the entombed pharaohs are actually enslaving them.
Yes. Well, it was my assumption that if we were modeling this slightly off of like an Egyptian themed setting, that the people who were entombed so they could serve as servants forever in the afterlife.
Right.
Except in this case, the afterlife is like right now. It's an unlife that this pharaoh is living.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than be denied the servants and slaves that he had in life, this subsection of people was entombed along with them.
And with Courtney's tenet, we know that they can be sacrificed to become part of the tomb.
A specific subsection.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one thing that the premise is pretty specific on is there is some kind of like obsession with divine blood, right?
Yeah.
Like that you need a really pure version of divine blood to create more of these biomes. So I think that we might be able to work with something there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe to put some like gray morality into this more, which Daniel, that seems to be kind of what you're after.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not so much that the inhabitants of the caves, other than the descendants that are actually used to like propagate the tomb biomes, not so much slaves as they are. Over time, it became a matter of survival, especially now that the world is just enormously fucked on the outside. These people more or less stay there voluntarily. Like they're free to leave and attempt to survive in the wasteland, but that's obviously a very difficult choice to make. So most just end up staying.
So are you saying that in the beginning it wasn't a bad relationship, but it's become one because of the situation outside?
Yeah, it could be something like that, where it morphed over time.
Because then I could see like the tomb characters who are still living, like these mummies, have become more evil over time, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we can get to the state that Rob is suggesting where like essentially they've enslaved their families.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think where I'm getting caught up here is the initial relationship with the pharaohs and rulers to begin with. It was my assumption that these people, like, some were buried and some were entombed with people who were not of royal blood. along with some people who were of royal blood. That was my initial assumption, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. The slaves are only the people who are descendants of the rulers. Because so like what made me feel like, obviously any slave master relationship is awful, but what made me feel like is that I feel like there's some religious connection that makes the families willing or wanting to be part of, because the way he said like would take care of the rulers for generations, it almost seems like a caretaker relationship.
Yeah.
It's become a slave relationship. See what I mean?
I got it. The tombs were originally designed like they were the actual structure ones as like fallout shelters, essentially.
Okay.
So like it was like if you stay here and tend to this tomb, you will be protected for all time. That kind of idea.
And then it's become an enslaving because of what's happened with these the rulers themselves. Like they've gone mad or they've become more evil in some way, and it's become a slave relationship.
I see it more as a coercive relationship where these are the people who are essentially acting as tomb guardians, where like there's either a sense of duty that is kind of baked in, or there's something like a sense of desperation where it's like, look, if you come and take care of the pharaoh, for eternity, then your family topside will be taken care of,
Right.
or you'll be blessed. Your family will be blessed elsewhere. So you could still have a directly antagonistic relationship from the jump, but with all of these interlocking parts that kind of prop it up. So it's like, yeah, this is obviously a thing, and there's obviously benefits for doing it,
Right. Like it's technically voluntary, but when you look at it, it's like,
right, exactly.
Not really. Yeah.
Kind of like how capitalism is supposed to be voluntary, but isn't. Yeah, exactly.
Is that another part on our bingo card there?
No, well, it should be, now that I think about it. Yeah.
So could it be the case that, because there's a cataclysm that occurred that ruined the world, right?
Yes.
Could it be the case that these tombs were set up in anticipation of that cataclysm? These families inhabited these tombs. They would take care of their rulers who had help build them with their labor and for eternity, and they would be protected from this cataclysm. But now that the cataclysm has happened, they're essentially imprisoned here, and the pharaohs inside are essentially enslaving them to keep it functioning.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And it could also be a thing where like maybe there is a way where you could technically like re-terraform the world, essentially, if these pharaohs actually allowed their divine blood to be used in that way, but they've gotten so greedy over time that they're like, no, we just want to sit underground and enjoy our sick cave things.
Yeah, because they're kings over their own space, essentially.
Right, and they don't want to like give the power to the people, basically.
Imagine the arrogance of one of these rulers where it's like, I was promised an eternity of servitude, and now just because the world is like cataclysmically destroyed, you want to take that away from me. This is like a child who you're trying to take toys away from, except it's like people and like, holy shit, real life situations, know?
Yeah.
Is there something that the ruler offers that makes it impossible to turn against him? We're very difficult to turn against him.
Well, you suggested that, the sorcerer is the one who creates the biomes, right?
I just said that they can tap into the resources to establish their power, but I like that. I think that's even better. So are they the ones that actually are able to make the ecosystem work without them?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And they need, like the pure divine bloodline to continue that cycle forward, right?
Oh, so they were like scientists in some way because they constructed this biome to begin with. They have the knowledge.
Right. And cool. Like that's where I think you can kind of get into some really interesting and admittedly appalling, like power dynamics and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Where I think that we can really make that part work, Now
I see it all. I'm good.
Okay. Awesome. I'm glad we're on board here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that I'm really kind of curious. And I think that through line that we created where, the slaves are kept to become biomes who are living biomes now, I think we've established here. Right. And those biomes are created by the undead pharaoh kings, the sorcerer kings that Daniel and I have kind of blended together here. I think that's a really cool, interesting thing that we can talk about. Obviously, there's some inherent horror within that situation, so I feel like I'm good on that. Now I'm going to like throw a twist into my own thing here and start with my second tenet, which is I want a major theme of this particular setting to be emancipation and freedom. Now, what I mean by this is almost entirely up to interpretation. And I mean that like deliberately. I want there to be like an exploration of that theming, both physically and on a metaphorical sense. And unfortunately, what I'm kind of hinting at here is the implication, the very dark implication of what does emancipation from this particular type of setting look like, especially to those who might be sacrificed. And I will open up the discussion to my co-hosts now and stop jabbering.
I have a tenet that may help you with that.
I mean, by all means,
go on.
Go right ahead.
I pictured the pharaoh types as somehow immobile, like unable to leave whatever space they're in because they're entombed. Not just within the biome, but within a space inside the biome.
Right.
And so I've written down as that there is a tomb out there where one of the rulers has awakened, and it's rumored that their awakening will help heal the world.
Oh.
So that this ruler, I don't know if they're good, but something about them and their biome will be a good destiny for the world.
Question. Can we, when you were speaking, when you're talking about this idea of like the rulers and the pharaohs kind of being like stuck in place, I had this very vivid image in my head. Can we make them really weird, fucked up undead dryads?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because like we have the biome set up where they're already like, it's turned into people, right? And I see that as they're able to tap into it because they're partially already tapped into it, literally. Like they are a living god in the biome. So like they're coming out of these undead gnarled trees and stuff like that. And like they're like woody undead corpses that are just, I don't know. This is like the imagery that I have in my head as I'm like, okay, we've got undead, we've got like biomes though. And why don't we mix those together and make that part of it? So like they're literally rooted, which is why they're immobile. And so like they have a seat of power that is like, you can't really move them. Like and even within the biome itself, the biome could expand for miles, but they're stuck to this particular area. And I think that could really work.
Yeah.
I like that. I think if it's different kind of materials depending on the tomb, it would be interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it would have to be an organic material, but I'm okay with the idea of like switching that up pretty drastically, you know?
Yeah, my second tenet was actually kind of a boring one, but basically that the tomb biomes aren't all the same sort of climate or terrain, but like vary a lot from like warm grasslands, lush tropical jungles, temperate forests. There's like a big variety, maybe even depending on where the undead pharaoh's bloodline originated from.
Yeah, that totally works. Now we have to come up with a bunch of different cool, like evil undead dryad looking things.
So yeah, right away when you talked about like the stationary, like warped undead stuff, first image that popped in my mind was also from the
Annihilation?
Also the Annihilation movie, yeah, where there's a scene in a pool where there's a human figure that's been greatly distorted and sort of pulled apart by this alien plant life matter stuff. It's a very intense, creepy, cool image. And the other one was the Master from Fallout 1.
Oh yeah,
who's this like
100%.
really fucked up amalgamation of people, and like it's just fleshy and gross.
I think you could just say skin, right?
Yeah,
like flesh.
Skin.
Yeah.
And it talks in like multiple voices. It like switches between them as it goes, and it's pretty gross too.
I love that. And I love the idea of like a corrupt edifice of nature acting as like a figurehead to worship, because it's like it invokes
Yeah.
kind of like paganism as well, even though it's like very much not. Like there's actually a lot of really cool stuff that we can kind of do with this, you know. I mean, I'm thinking of different biomes. It's like you could have a cactus god. You, as silly as that might seem, but imagine like how horrifying that might actually be, you know. Or
Ooh, yeah.
yeah, or maybe something as simple as like a banyan tree, or like anything that you can twist and corrupt into some kind of weird nature thing. I think it would be really fun.
I'm also getting thematic vibes of not from these landscapes, but from the original movie of Stargate, the whole Egyptian styling of it. I mean, and not the series. Didn't watch the series. It seems really goofy.
I heard it's good though. I've heard it's like actually good.
I've seen some of it. I didn't really watch it like sequentially, just kind of saw episodes as they came on, and like it's enjoyable.
Yeah, I've heard it's like it's not bad. I hear it's like this is back when like there was a Star Trek drought before it got ruined by Picard. And it was like, oh yeah, you know, this series is really taken where TNG left off, you know, like that kind of thing. It like had that kind of spiritual successor vibe to it. But I don't know. I'm not really a Stargate person, so
I only saw a few episodes and it just seemed kind of goofy compared to the film. But what I'm picturing is the kind of awe that the film evoked, you know, of the pyramids coming to the earth. So I wonder, you know, like the interiors of these landscapes must be like scary like that. And that could be part of the horror, is the revelation of it.
I think that there is something that we're like, I certainly overlooked and wasn't really considering, but this idea of these tombs, right? Like I was considering them to be in some cases like mostly underground and mostly kind of like humble and, you know, whatever. But I mean, there's a good chance that they could just be massive monuments, right? Like that they could vary wildly in terms of what they might look like.
That's what I was picturing.
Yeah, like that's certainly something that I overlooked for sure. I had a very specific kind of thought in my mind. But this could be really cool and interesting that we can kind of approach each biome as also a monument, right? Because it has to be protected from the outside world in some way. And so you could go from like the 7 wonders of the world style thing where it's like, oh, this is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, except it's like encased in a glass dome. And that is that particular biome, that kind of thing, you know?
We could each do similar to how in the last series we each did a petroglyph city. We could each bring an underground tomb biome of our own creation to next episode for our factions.
That's very true. Yeah. The one thing I am kind of like curious about is like how water would work if the outside is like completely devastated. Like, how does the water get in, and like, is it potable water? You know, like that's kind of the first question that I have about the setting.
Yeah, I was picturing like underground water sources, whether it's underground rivers or lakes or even just trickling from the walls, getting water that way.
I can see some of these being just giant structures in the desert, like above ground. And with enough technology, I'm sure you could solve that from a science fictional point of view, or if this is a fantasy, from a fantasy point of view. Because it seems like the world is a desiccated husk because of whatever happened.
Right.
But I imagine perhaps, you know, if it's high science, they may have moved resources into these tombs. You know, you could move entire lakes or entire, you know, I don't know, entire oceans into a single structure, if we're talking about crazy technology.
Aesthetically, I'm thinking about the floating gardens at Tenochtitlan from like the Aztec civilization. And I'm like, yeah, we could just do that. But like, you know, this particular pharaoh really wanted like a big lake in their tomb. And thus they have a big lake that is somehow like sustaining itself in terms of water reproduction and whatnot. Yeah. And again, like you said, Daniel, we could go magic or science with it if necessary. It all works. It's all coming together. Yeah. What other questions do we have before we get into the recap and try and figure out if we satisfied our tenets? Let's talk about the other questions we might have about this particular setting.
I don't think we know really anything about these people who serve the pharaohs. We know that the pharaohs themselves are revered and they have some kind of special knowledge that allows them to maintain or create this thing in the first place.
Yep.
We just know that these people live in a gilded cage, and they've kind of over the generations become part of this system, you know?
I just realized something. We've approached this from the idea that these people all wanted to be there, or at least were like kind of coerced in there in some kind of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that we could also approach this from a way as, hey, this is your duty to go and like maintain this particular tomb for X amount of time. And then during the cataclysm, they are then like essentially trapped inside. So these people who are there, maybe they weren't all willing, and maybe they were just like nearby and ran in during the massive cataclysm that occurred. So that's also another way that we can kind of approach the people inside. Is some of them were the grove tenders, some of them were, you know, the divine descendants of these particular pharaohs and rulers and stuff like that. But I'm just suggesting that this is also another angle that we might want to approach it from.
I mean, you could. So if we take that a step further, if the cataclysm pushed the commoner types into the tombs because of whatever was happening, and the families or the ones that maintain the tombs, they're already in there. The slaves could be those families, but not because of the pharaoh, but because of the people who have pushed them in there. So, I mean, that would flip the slavery concept on its head, because usually it's top down, right? Like something truly evil and oppressive enslaves what's below it. But what if it's the people on the outside who have come to enslave the families who maintain this, you know?
It could almost be like an upper middle class kind of flood into these tombs. And when they got in there and kind of saw in their minds the sort of luxury that the slave class was living in, or the working class was living in, and decided like, well, you guys have been like spoiled with this for however many years you've been working in this. We're going to take over, and you're now serving us.
Right. And so the pharaoh, while, you know, they may be corrupt too, it gives them a kind of a space to operate in where they can help the people who have been maintaining the system, and also can be an antagonist to this middle class that's pushing inward.
Yeah, that adds a lot of dimension to it, definitely.
So again, I want to go back to my second tenet, which is like a theme of emancipation. Who are the ones who we're focusing on in this? Like, let's give ourselves a protagonist class that we can kind of work with, who we can kind of feel sympathy for. Who are we focusing on in that regard?
I think it can be in two spaces. So I can see like a sacrificial family slaves, the ones who are given to the system to become part of it. I can see them obviously wanting to be free of the cycle, right?
Right.
And I can also see some middle class character, you know, who is seeing kind of the horrors subjected upon the sacrificial class, and how their system is not really sustainable because maybe they're getting greedier, rapacious, and they're depleting like the population, so things are going bad, and they want to make a change too, and maybe they have to appeal to this psychotic pharaoh that's deep inside. I don't know, like I can see them working together, and because there's something above them that's bad, you know.
So you're suggesting that there's something worse than the pharaohs in the tombs themselves?
I think maybe like the pharaohs are bad because they're kind of like crazy kind of constructs at this point, right? But I also think maybe the people who are the charge of this middle class, like they probably have something more nefarious going on politically that threatens the whole ecosystem, and maybe there's like the common people under them. That might be where the heroes are, the characters.
Yeah, this is kind of a tough one, because I like both concepts. You know, I love the idea that we're following a protagonist who has to make the decision, you know, whether to try and run from the ritual on its eve or something like that.
Yeah.
Because that's a really compelling thought to me, is to kind of approach it that way. But at the same time, I am somewhat interested in the claustrophobia of, you know, living in a system that you know is doomed. Not that we might know anything about that, but we'll keep that shit on lock for later. But you know, like knowing that the end or that you think you can see the end so much sooner than it actually is. Like that might be something that's kind of interesting as well.
I mean, think of the tables turning, right? Like if prior to the cataclysm, the sacrificial class was regarded in a religious awe, right? And the people outside these pre-tombs were they weren't slaves. Maybe they were part of the population that was served by this process, right? So they were the middle class, right? And now they've always looked at them as being better than them because they were these gilded sacrificial types. Now the tables have turned, they're in charge, and they can treat them like they're just serfs, right? And so maybe the idea of like this sacrifice character trying to escape, and then finding some empathy with some other kid who's part of the middle class, realizing this is wrong, and they have to figure out what to do. And on one hand, they've got an evil pharaoh that might have the answers, and on the other hand, they have a family they can't trust.
And then as far as escape, they're kind of limited to either attempting to just constantly run from their pursuers within the city itself, or trying to go out into the wastes, and who knows what's out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I'm really intrigued by this idea of the biomes communicating with one another. Because I feel like in some ways that's the only thing that you could really kind of instill hope into people with, is like, hey, there's other people out there, like, hey, it's not, it might look really bad in this particular biome, but it might be better, and there might be hope for a later point. And I think that Gluax even offered us that kind of like glimmer of hope that we could kind of establish here as well, in the idea of the biome folk being somewhat resistant to the outside world, right?
Yeah. So technically, maybe they don't even necessarily know that, but once they are on the outside, they're kind of like, wait, we can survive out here? Like, what?
Yeah.
And we've been told this entire time that we were in danger and we were just going to die immediately.
Of course, what is even more horrifying is imagine that one of these divine slaves, biome folk, walk out and they escape with help from another one of the regular folk, and they walk through this blasted landscape of divine like whatever, and their friends die, except they're fine, and they continue to walk on. And it's like that kind of loneliness, that haunting loneliness that comes with post-apocalyptic fiction, I think is like, it's right there, like that is something that I think is potentially deeply steeped within the setting,
Yeah, I mean, I guess it like carries on that theme of sacrifice through too, with the kind of helpers dying after getting this person free. But there could also be a flip side where if the one with the divine blood knows how they can start their own biome, even if it's like not going to be as grand or as strong as the pharaoh biomes, but if they know how to sacrifice themselves to create one, maybe they would do that to protect these people who have helped them.
So, I mean, I see this as kind of cyclical, or like the conflict is rather cyclical, where each of these particular folks all feel as though they're trapped in their individual tombs. And then eventually, depending on how long it might take them, one of them eventually walks out into the waste and then creates a new biome, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that could be the source of the hope, if there's our like the classic post-apocalyptic theme of, you get a radio signal that says, help is out here, like come to this place if you want freedom. But of course that could also be a trap.
And so like there's this kind of like metaphor for literally reseeding the world, but it's like with human blood or slightly divine human blood. I don't know why, but I find that conflict to be kind of unsatisfying in some way, and I can't tell why. Daniel, do you know why I'm feeling unsatisfied?
I don't know if it's because we need an extra element to make things interesting. Because like I don't see like a clear conflict. I mean, there is a clear conflict, obviously. We just what you guys just described. But what I mean is I don't see a clear structure for the conflict. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how it's going to take shape. I am interested in this connection between all the biomes.
Yeah.
We need like some kind of event that will make things move again. The only event we had is the cataclysm.
It's got good bones. It's definitely got good bones, but like there is something that I think is missing, and I'm curious about that. Let's recap the tenets, and then maybe we can kind of figure out what we're missing here. So Courtney, you start us off. Can you remind us of your first tenet, please?
Yeah, so the divine blood slave class is in a gilded cage. When they're sacrificed to form the tome biomes, they literally become the biome themselves and kind of remain alive in some capacity within it.
Okay. And Daniel, your first tenet?
The slavers themselves are powerful sorcerers, and they use the latent power of the tombs to establish their power, basically.
Right. And we've established that being the pharaohs who are undead, but they are tapped into the power within the biome itself, correct?
And we've also expanded that to mean possibly now that power, consolidated power, is this outer class of people who have snuck into the tomb and kind of enslaved the enslavers. But they don't have any direct control over how the system works, I think.
Right, but I think that the pharaoh remaining this kind of solitary, imperious figure is an important aspect that I think we want to keep in mind, right?
Oh yeah, I think that's in tandem. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. My first tenet was I wanted the genre to be steeped in horror, which I think is pretty evident through everything that we're talking about.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and. Yeah, I think that the idea that these pharaoh/ruler types are undead, the ruling class are an undead, monster, that works. I think that's fun. Also, I think aesthetically mixing them with like dryads is also a fun little twist. Like I think that's fun and unique that we can kind of approach it that way. My second tenet, we're going to reverse now, was I wanted themes of freedom and emancipation to be evident, something to kind of work towards. And I feel like that is kind of there. I think that that's something that is subtextual rather than overt at the moment. What do y'all think?
I think that's what it would be working towards if we're saying the enslaved sacrificial class is being pinched, and then there's maybe people on the ones doing the pinching who are seeing something's wrong with the system. I don't think it's clearly defined, but I think there's an opportunity for it.
Yeah. I think that we have to figure out who's being emancipated here, and whether that means the destruction of all the biomes or the reconstruction of all the biomes. That might be something that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was just thinking like these pharaohs have been around for, I guess we didn't establish a timeline, but presuming like thousands of years probably at this point.
Yeah, let's assume
hundreds.
Yeah.
But either way, they've been, gaining power through these sacrifices for quite a while. Like what happens if you kill one of the pharaohs? Does that power kind of flow out of them into the wastes? Is that how you terraform the area? By removing this like consolidation?
I like the idea that the only way that we can kind of reestablish some kind of livable space is by directly like chopping off the head of a pharaoh.
Yeah.
And I think that what might be kind of interesting there is it would satisfy my theme of emancipation, but it also would be kind of interesting to see all of the different systems that protect that pharaoh, because I don't think it should be evident and obvious and like so simple that like everyone's like, yeah, the pharaoh's bad, we got to kill him.
Right.
I think that there should be systems in place, whether that be through people or culture or religious systems that all protect the pharaoh, not just physically, but I mean on like a cultural and spiritual sense, that there is something like needs to be overcome in that regard, and I think, Daniel, is that something that you'd be interested in exploring in terms of that extra conflict? No. Okay.
I'm trying to. I
know a Daniel polite no when I hear hear it. That pause, I'm like, okay, I got you. That's fine. I'm cool with that. Let's hear it.
I like the idea that the death of the pharaoh is somehow key to that, right? But I think if I want the pharaoh to not be totally the antagonist, because I think that suggests that he is totally antagonist. But I think there's this other class of people who are worse.
Right. I think
in
that's
some
what
way.
Rob was getting at in a way.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
How do you mean?
Like, they could easily just kind of go up and cut the pharaoh's head off if they wanted to, but doing so would remove their power in a way, because they would no longer have this area to be in charge in, and they like having it, so they don't want to get rid of it.
Oh, so they're protecting him for that. They're protecting others from killing him, so that they can consolidate their power. Okay, that I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those were the systems that I were talking about.
Okay, I thought you meant the pharaoh's systems. You know?
Oh yeah, no.
Right, and I'm like, he's just bad. He's just the top dog again. Then.
Right. And I think that it's very easy to like look at that and say like, well, it's easy. You just take care of this one person and all the trouble go away. I'm completely disinterested in something.
That was my thinking.
Exactly,
and so what you're suggesting, I think, is perfect, because then the pharaoh isn't the enemy, really. He's bad, right? He's kind of probably the type that will bite off your head and drink your blood, whatever, because they're crazy. Yeah. They're probably all vary in terms of their weirdness. I'm sure they vary, but it seems like the new ruling class are the ones that want to keep this intact, even though it's a corrupt system. You know.
Yeah.
I would even say that, like, as powerful as the pharaohs are, they are more of a symbol or a figurehead for the corrupt system that is actually in place.
Like they're slaves themselves, in a sense, you know.
That's kind of interesting. Or like they're unwitting slaves, you know.
Yeah.
Like, as long as we continue to to offer blood sacrifice, we control the pharaoh. And that's kind of what you were suggesting earlier, where it's like there is the more demonstrably evil sub system or sub faction of people who are just like, we control everything. It looks like the pharaoh's involved. It's fine, but
they could be secretive about it. Like maybe they pretend to be supplicant, but really they are the ruling class. And the way they interact with the pharaoh is reverent, but they really know that they're in control of the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And mind you, like, I imagine that where you find the fun and nuance and like real world building is in each of the individual tombs that we're going to be exploring, where, you know, in some cases it entirely depends on who the pharaoh is, right? And how that pharaoh interacts with the rest of his kind of kingdom. I'm sure that there are tombs where it's like, the pharaoh doesn't care. He's basically like the Sultan from Aladdin, where he's like, you give him toys to play with and like the entire world can burn and he doesn't care. And then perhaps even scarier, there's the opposite of that really ruthless, cutthroat, like, you think you're in control, but I'm actually the mastermind behind that spider web that you didn't even fucking see. So like they're playing 5D chess, let alone 4D chess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this does have like a lot of really amazing and also disturbing parallels to modern politics and past slavery and civil rights and everything. And
almost by design. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. Read your history books, kids. It's important. We should be involved with this stuff. Anyway, okay, so yeah, I think that helps with I Daniel, would you agree with me? Would you feel like that's kind of the missing element that we didn't have before?
Yeah. Because now we've got like 2 levels of bad guy, which I think is more interesting. You know,
completely agree. Yeah,
I do feel like if the cataclysm had happened and there was just the slave class and the pharaoh, like at some point the slave class probably would have just been a pure revolt and been like, well, we can just fucking chop his head off and leave. But now with this other class, it like adds this complexity that's really interesting.
And that's what I was hinting at, where I'm like, this conflict is cyclical. It's like it happens every time, everywhere. Like, it's always going to end up being that the slave class overthrows the pharaoh, right? Like that's like why I'm bored by it. But if we have this other thing that's happening as well, that could be interesting. That could be something that we can kind of work towards.
And I can see like, you know, a sacrifice character and one from that's maybe a politician's daughter or son or something approaching the pharaoh itself, sneaking in there to consult with it and receiving some kind of horrific prophetic message, but realizing that it too is a slave. And wow, they've got to do a lot of work to undo the system, you know?
Yeah.
Right. And of course, what it might be really interesting at that point is the juncture at which that person realizes, am I just trying to reestablish the pharaoh, or am I trying to establish something new entirely, as a power system? I think that's a really interesting way to approach it as well.
Yeah.
I still have so many questions about how this all works. Like how the pharaohs express their power isn't just through these biomes. Like Daniel, I imagine you had in mind that they were like sorcerer kings, like very powerful sorcerers or magic wielders in some way, that it wasn't just a matter of boop, I made the biome. It's like, no, they're able to do other stuff as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, what you guys were talking about, like with this kind of organic aspect to it, like maybe they have like, whether it's nanomachines or magical spells, whatever, they have like some constructive power, like conjuration or like piecing things together, or psychic power. I don't know.
Do we want to make that an expression of each particular pharaoh? So that way next week when we come with our factions, we'd be like, this is what my pharaoh looks like, and this is how they act, like that kind of thing.
I think that could work.
Daniel, are you cool with that?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Hell yeah. Okay, so there, we got the faction homework out of the way. We're making a pharaoh in a city, y'all, each of us. That's cool. Other tenets. Have we finished all the tenets yet? Courtney, what was your second tenet?
Oh yeah, just that each tomb biome isn't like the same sort of climate or terrain, but it's from all over the place.
All right. And I think that's fairly well established, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And Daniel, what was yours?
There's a tomb out there where a ruler has awakened, and their awakening will be the key to healing the world.
Oh yeah, we should probably
we have not touched that at all. Yeah, we definitely need to. We definitely need to talk about that. Is this like a Shangri-La, or is this like an El Dorado? Is it like kind of myth, and it's like maybe that's like what the communication is about, or is this real? I mean, Daniel, you said that it's a tenet, so it has to be real, right?
Yeah, I think it's actually happening. I don't know what the extent of rumor is. It could be in the same tomb. Like if the story's focus is one tomb, which is possible, it could be that tomb. I don't know.
Interesting. Alternatively, how do we feel about like maybe a collective of pharaohs getting together, or like this particular pharaoh gathering other pharaohs and like transplanting them into their tomb?
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Because then you can have like this. I always tend to think visually, and I'm just thinking of like this massive spire of all these transplanted pharaohs and their various like organic forms of dryadism. And so it's like, but it's like they're all meshed and like mixed up together. So it's like a pillar of just like corpse people stacked high on one another. And then at the top of that is the actual pharaoh. And maybe he's like untethered by like nature or something like that. I don't know. I'm just
like Kafka.
Actually,
yeah.
Yes. Great.
Excellent. Yeah. I was also thinking of that, what is it? The Norwegian sculptor that we went to that sculpture garden of, Rob?
Oh yeah. The Vigeland Museum, right?
Yes. With the creepy towers of people, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. That is close to what I was thinking of. Although Kefka's tower as a monument to hubris is also very good. So yeah, you've got the nerd option and you've got the art option. So take your pick between the two.
Here's a question for you guys. I'm having trouble in my head figuring out where this narrative takes place, right? Like,
yes,
we have this really interesting ecosystem we built in the concept of a single tomb. But to me, like the idea of having to deal with multiple tombs seems overwhelming. Like, I don't know how we would deal with that. I mean, we're trying to solve that by having this like connection between them and the transplanting but I feel like if the story is going to be all the tombs in the world, like where is the conflict happening? Like, is there a way we can center it on a tomb? I don't know if that makes sense or if we should do that. I just feel like it's kind of sprawling right now.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you mean. Like, there's a lot of disconnect between like all of these potential conflicts that we might have, right?
Yeah. Even the thing I suggested, like, I don't, and now given all the things we come up with, I don't necessarily like the idea of it being a faraway tomb, right? Because, okay, what if the story's happening in this other tomb? Like, why does that other one matter? You know?
So, do we want to? Maybe that's just what we do. Maybe we have this thing take place in the god pharaoh's tomb, like where we have the big pillar of other pharaohs, and there's other tombs out there that we can kind of make, but the main conflict is this thing. It's like, yeah, I've already conquered the other pharaohs, I've already conquered the other tombs, and I've taken them as my trophy. Is that something that's interesting, or is that something that we want to like reconsider?
I guess that's not as interesting to me as like the more sort of individual story of like fleeing from one of the smaller tombs.
The characters, yeah.
Right.
I like that. I like focusing on that too. I think maybe I like the idea of this hybrided pharaoh, right? Maybe the fabled pharaoh, we can put him in this tomb that we're dealing with, right? Where these characters are. Could these splices have been brought to this tomb? I'm thinking like travelers who have made it from one tomb to the other for whatever reason. They've come to this tomb to contribute to this pharaoh, to make some sort of change that will fundamentally change the system.
Oh, so you're suggesting that these are offerings to this divine or mythic pharaoh figure?
Like they've come from other tombs. They know the danger of this society inside this pharaoh's thing that's actually against the pharaoh. And they've got to find people who are, I don't know, like sympathetic to overthrowing this. Maybe that's who our characters are. You know, one inside the sacrificial class, one inside the actual system. And they've got to get these clippings to the pharaoh or whatever it is. They've got to like transform the pharaoh to change things.
Yeah, or it could be like one character from each of the factions that we come up with next time.
Yeah, there you
go.
Like,
there we go.
They're all traveling to provide offerings, but secretly they actually want to like light this thing up on fire.
Yeah, and transform it, like Tar was saying, turning it into this other being.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I think that's a great way that we can approach it for sure.
Yeah, because then you still have the other tombs.
Right. And there's a sense of connection between everything as well. So there's like stakes and impact that matter. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. How do they travel? Is there like an entire subclass of like these like divine people who are like, hey, we're couriers. We have like known resistance to the outside blight, you know?
Probably really hard.
But I'm also like kind of hesitant to explore the outside, you know, because I think that.
What if it's underground caverns that they've built?
That I'm more inclined to be intrigued by. Yeah.
Well, whatever it is, it must be perilous. I can say that much. Like you wouldn't. They've risked everything to get this far, I assume. Because we didn't say that the outside is like a radioactive death field. We did say that it's just inhospitable. So it could, and it's a desert, right? Yeah. So I mean, we've crossed deserts before, so maybe that's what it is. It's like you can't survive out there, but you can cross it. You know?
Right. I'd be fine with that. And I mean, we don't need to focus on it if it's just like a true wasteland desert. There aren't really any landmarks around.
But maybe it's not like there's not oxygen. It's just a shitty desert. You know?
Sandstorms and stuff constantly.
You know? Sandstorms and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's time that we throw in the twist and kind of explore it that way. Yeah?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's go ahead and roll for the twist. Okay. Our twist this time is add dinosaurs.
Yes.
Okay. Sure. Let's I mean, why not, right?
There's your way of crossing the desert.
Oh my God, you're so right. You're 100% right, Dan. Okay, hold on. We'll tackle this next time. We will tackle it next episode. Thank you for listening. And again, a big thank you to Gluax for suggesting this particular prompt. Remember that if you want us to build your world and talk about your prompt, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click on the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. And if you want to come join our Discord, chat about dinosaurs, tombs, pharaohs, anything. If you want a copy of our bingo sheet, we don't have it, but you can find that in our Discord. Click the link in this episode, follow that link over, and come chat with us. If you're feeling particularly generous or you have the wealth of the pharaohs, you can always give us money over on Patreon. for a link in the description. I mean, whatever you want, it's fine. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.